Earlier this season, I made a video about The Boys in which I talked about how the show was trying too hard and that it had stopped being a show that would last and started being a show that just reacted to whatever was going on in the world that week. And I still stand by most of the things that I said. But The Boys just ended, and this might be a hot take, but the finale, all things considered, was actually good. So let's talk about it. This show, this season, this finale, and what this show is ultimately going to be remembered for. To me, Season 5 felt like 3 different shows fighting for screen time within one season. The question of whether revenge becomes genocide, whether Billy Butcher is ultimately any different from the thing that he spent 5 seasons trying to destroy. And that show was compelling every time it was on screen. The second show was a backdoor pilot to Vought Rising. Episode 6 especially felt less like a penultimate stretch of a final season, and more like homework being handed in for a franchise that hadn't even started yet. Soldier Boy's backstory, the history of Vought, all of those things are interesting in isolation. But when you're 6 episodes deep into the last 8 episodes of your final season, interesting in isolation is not good enough. The final season has to feel like it's closing something and not opening something entirely different. And the third show was Gen V, a spin-off continuation that ultimately went nowhere. The season had actually started strong. Episode 1 felt like the show knew it was in the endgame. Urgency, consequence, the world genuinely changed. Episode 2 still works, but you can feel the show doing that Boys thing where instead of narrowing the board, it adds 3 different elements to it. And by episode 4, you're questioning whether this is the final season momentum or just another episode of The Boys. And then episode 5 happened. One shot, a non-linear episode telling different characters a story out of order, one of the best episodes of the show. And then episodes 6 and 7 ultimately slowed down the season even further. Episode 7 particularly should have felt like the walls are closing in. Instead, we were left doing the calculations for how many stories this show still has to wrap up in the final episode. But the biggest failure of season 5 isn't even anything that happened in season 5, it's what didn't happen. Gen V, particularly season 2, spent a significant amount of time building Moreau as this character that's a Homelander level threat, whose power and instability made her feel like the wild card that season 5 needed. Along with the virus storyline, it felt like everything was laying the groundwork for an incredible final season of the show. And season 5 happened, and the biggest thing that Moreau did was that she drove a truck to Canada. And Gen V ultimately got cancelled. Everything that the spin-off spent 2 seasons setting up amounted to nothing in the show that it was supposed to feed to. I want to be fair about this. This is probably good for casual viewers because then they don't have to watch Gen V to understand The Boys and things like that. But for those of us who did watch it, who spent time in these characters and their story, especially because we were told that it mattered, it's frustrating. But like, Gen V wasn't even a separate problem. It was a symptom of season 5's bigger issue. The show kept asking us to care about the expanded universe, and then it felt like at the last second they remembered that they still have to end the main one. After the season 4 finale, if you had asked me what season 5 needed the most, I would have said Homelander going full scorched earth. Not just threatening people, not just posturing, actually lasering through a group of civilians. The full horror of what this character has always been capable of, unleashed without restraint. But we never really got that. And I think back to that Chicago scene in Invincible, which really changed the game for the whole show. I feel like The Boys needed its own version of that. A moment where Homelander stopped pretending and just became the monster that he always was, underneath the entire performance. Instead, we got a face-off between Homelander and Butcher in the Oval Office, which I liked, but it was more of scorched room than scorched earth. The season probably needed 10 episodes. More build-up, more consequence, more space for the final confrontations to happen. 8 episodes just wasn't enough to close out the expanded universe threads and give the main show the ending it deserved. But yet, the finale worked. And I say this as someone who went in skeptical, who had watched 2 middling episodes and who was not convinced that the show could pull it off. The Oval Office showdown, Kimiko using her new powers to strip Homelander of everything, Ryan showing up, Butcher finally getting his hands on Homelander and then unleashing the virus, and then Huey ultimately having to stop him. It all worked. The last part is the most important thing that the finale does, because it's the question that the show has always been building up towards. It's not whether they can kill Homelander, it's whether Butcher is any different from Homelander. And the answer that the show gives is, well, almost. He almost becomes the very thing that he's been fighting. Huey stopping him is the show's way of saying the cycle of violence ends here. That genocide is not justice regardless of who the targets are. There is no version of Billy Butcher releasing that virus that isn't a betrayal of everything that he's told himself he's been doing this for. I've seen a lot of people online saying that Homelander was right, that he shouldn't have died, that Huey should have let Butcher use that virus, and I think those people missed the entire point of the show. Homelander was never right. That was the argument that the show against that kind of power that doesn't have to answer to anyone. And Butcher releasing that virus would have made him the exact thing that he spent 5 seasons fighting. Finale understood that and it stuck to it. The ending is safe, it's predictable, it's maybe a bit too neat, but in a world where shows constantly fumble their endings, like Game of Thrones, Umbrella Academy, Stranger Things, the original Dexter, I'd rather have a safe landing than a spectacular crash. The Boys did not end like Breaking Bad, but it also did not crash and burn like Game of Thrones. It landed somewhere in the middle. A great show with a good finale, dragged down by a final season that kept looking sideways at the franchise around it. Here's the question I keep coming back to. In 10 years, when someone binge watches The Boys, what will their experience be like? I think they're gonna like season 5 more than we did. Not because it's secretly better, it's not, but because they won't have the frustration of watching it weekly and feeling the momentum problems in real time. This is what happened to me with Game of Thrones season 8. I binged it long after the show had already aired, and I thought it wasn't a great final season, but I certainly didn't think it was as catastrophic as people were making it out to be. But here's my concern about The Boys long term. The show has always been about what's going on in the world right now. Homelander as a Trump analogy, the Deep's Andrew Tate podcast thing, the AI video, the obvious political satire, so tied to a specific cultural moment. In 5 years, that's gonna feel dated in a way that a show like Daredevil never does. That might be the show's real limitation, not the ending, not the final season, the choice to be ultimately about what's going on right now than to aim for something more timeless. But anyways guys, The Boys is over. 5 seasons, 7 years, one of the most talked about shows of its era and one of my favorites. I came into this season skeptical and I left with complicated feelings. The finale was good, but the season around it was more interested in building the next thing than closing this one out properly. And the show as a whole was genuinely great television that may struggle to feel as urgent in a decade as it does right now. But Huey killing Butcher, Homelander ultimately dying to Butcher, and Ryan choosing something different than what his father chose. Those are good endings, and those matter. The Boys earned its final moments even when it didn't fully earn its final season. Well guys, that's gonna be it for this video. I thank you for watching up until this point. I'm gonna try to be more consistent on this channel, so hopefully you guys can join me for the ride. You can follow me on social media at Nightwake, and I'll see you guys in the next one.